What would you do if you caught someone stealing food from your home and discovered they were only trying to keep their children alive? The day I found my maid hiding in the pantry changed everything I believed about wealth, dignity, and what it truly means to be human. Stay with me until the end, because one small act of compassion turned into a legacy that fed hearts for generations. Before we dive into this incredible story, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our powerful, life-changing content. Millionaire finds his maid hiding to eat leftovers. What happened next will break your heart. I used to believe success was measured by the height of my mansion walls and the weight of my bank accounts. My name is Hassan, and by 40, I had everything money could buy, except the ability to truly see the people who serve me every day. In my house worked a quiet maid named Shazia. She moved like a shadow, speaking only when spoken to, her eyes always low with politeness that felt almost painful. I never asked about her life. To me, she was simply part of the machinery that kept my home spotless. One evening, I returned home earlier than usual after a business meeting was canceled. The house was unusually silent. No clinking dishes, no humming from the kitchen. As I walked toward the dining room, I heard a faint rustling sound coming from the pantry. Curious, I opened the door. There, crouched beside a shelf, was Shazia. She was trembling, clutching a small plate of leftover rice and vegetables. Food for my lunch. Her eyes widened in terror. When she saw me, the plate slipped from her hands, scattering grains across the floor like tiny pearls of shame. "I'm sorry, sir. I was hungry," she whispered, her voice breaking. In that moment, something inside me shattered. This woman, who worked in a house overflowing with abundance, had been hiding to eat scraps like a thief. "Why didn't you ask for food?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "My children, they need more. I save what I can for them. I didn't want to seem ungrateful." Her words pierced me deeper than any business loss ever had. I thought of my dining table, where food was wasted daily without a second thought. I thought of my own children, who refused meals simply because they disliked the taste. And here was a mother, stealing leftovers to keep her children alive. I knelt down beside her. For the first time in years, I saw not a servant, but a human being carrying invisible burdens. "Shazia," I said, my voice unsteady, "no one in this house will ever hide to eat again." Tears streamed down her face, but she said nothing. That night, I sat alone in my study, unable to sleep. The image of her trembling hands haunted me. I realized that wealth without compassion is a silent poverty of the soul. The next morning, I called Shazia and her children to the dining table. They hesitated at the doorway, unsure if they were truly welcome. "Please," I said gently, "this table is for family." Her children ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might disappear. Then they smiled, small, fragile smiles that filled my home with a warmth it had never known. From that day forward, I ensured fair wages, proper meals, and education for her children. But something else changed too. I began visiting the staff quarters, listening to stories I had never cared to hear. I started a community kitchen in our neighborhood so no one would sleep hungry. My children learned to serve food with their own hands, discovering gratitude in the process. Months later, Shazia stood before me, her eyes shining with dignity instead of fear. "My son wants to become a teacher," she said proudly. I smiled, feeling richer than ever before. Years passed, and that boy did become a teacher. He returned to our neighborhood, educating children who once faced the same hunger he had known. On the day he opened his small school, he thanked me, but I knew the truth. It was Shazia who had taught me the greatest lesson of my life. Moral, true wealth is not counted in money, but in the kindness we extend to those who have less. The day the school opened, I stood quietly at the back, watching children in neatly pressed uniforms recite their first lessons. Their voices were soft, uncertain, but filled with hope. Shazia stood beside me, her hands folded, her eyes glistening with tears that no longer came from fear, but from pride. "Sir," she whispered, "you changed our lives." I shook my head. "No, Shazia, you changed mine." For years after that, I found myself drawn to places I had once ignored. Narrow streets, crowded markets, modest homes where resilience lived behind tired smiles. I began funding scholarships. But more importantly, I began giving my time. I listened. I learned names. I heard stories of struggle, sacrifice, and quiet courage. And with each story, the walls around my heart fell away. One evening, my daughter Amina approached me after serving dinner at the community kitchen. "Baba," she said, "why didn't we do this before?" Her question lingered in the air. I looked at her small hands, still smelling of spices and soap, and answered honestly, because I was blind to the blessings we had. She nodded thoughtfully. "Then we should never be blind again." Her words became a promise our family lived by. Years turned into a decade. The community kitchen grew into a network of centers across the city. The small school expanded into a proper building with a library, science room, and a playground filled with laughter. Children who once worked in workshops now carried books. Girls who had never imagined education began dreaming of becoming doctors, artists, and engineers. And every time I visited, they ran toward me, not because I was wealthy, but because I had learned to kneel to their height and listen to their dreams. One winter morning, I received a letter. The envelope was worn, the handwriting careful. It was from Shazia's son, now Master Imran. He wrote, "Sir, today one of my students shared his lunch with a classmate who had none. I saw in that moment the lesson you taught my mother and the lesson she passed to me. Kindness multiplies." I read the letter again and again, my vision blurred with tears. The pantry incident had lasted only a few minutes, yet its echo had transformed countless lives. That evening, I walked through my home, now filled with laughter from staff and family alike. No one ate alone. No one hid. At the dining table, Shazia sat beside my wife, discussing recipes as equals. Her grandchildren played with mine, their giggles blending into one joyful sound. I realized then that my house had become something it had never been before, a home, and in that home, love was served before every meal. As I grew older, my steps slowed, but my heart felt lighter than ever. On my 70th birthday, the community gathered to celebrate. Children presented handmade cards. Teachers shared stories. Mothers brought dishes prepared with care and gratitude. When it was time to speak, I looked at the sea of faces, people who were no longer strangers, but threads woven into the fabric of my life. I once thought I owned everything. But the day I learned to share, I finally gained what truly matters. Family beyond blood, wealth beyond money, and a legacy written in human hearts. The applause that followed was warm, but it was the smiles, the sincere, unguarded smiles, that felt like the greatest reward. That night, as I sat quietly under the stars, Shazia joined me. We did not speak for a long time. Words were unnecessary. The silence between us was no longer filled with fear or distance, but with mutual respect and understanding. Finally, she said softly, "Sir, you gave us dignity." I replied, "You gave me humanity." And under that vast sky, I understood a simple truth. A single act of compassion can travel through generations, lighting paths you may never walk, warming hearts you may never meet. The pantry door had opened once in my life, but through it, an entire world of kindness had entered. The years continued to unfold like pages of a book I never wanted to finish. Each morning brought new faces to the community kitchen, and each evening carried stories of small victories. First jobs, healed relationships, children passing exams their parents never dreamed they could take. I began keeping a journal, not of business deals or profits, but of moments. A boy tying his first pair of donated shoes. A widow laughing freely for the first time in years. My own son choosing to spend his weekends teaching math instead of playing video games. These were the dividends of compassion, returns no bank could calculate. One summer afternoon, during a heat wave that pressed heavily upon the city, the electricity failed across several neighborhoods. Water pumps stopped. Fans fell silent. Tempers began to rise in the suffocating air. Without hesitation, our community centers opened their doors. We distributed cold water, shared shaded spaces, and organized volunteers to check on the elderly. I watched as people who had once stood in line for help now stood at the front, offering it. Kindness, I realized, had completed its circle. That evening, As lanterns flickered in the dim halls, a young woman approached me. She introduced herself as Nita. "Sir, years ago my mother used to collect food from your kitchen," she said. "Today I am a doctor at the city hospital. I came to volunteer." Her words settled gently into my heart. Not pride, something deeper. A quiet gratitude for having witnessed the unfolding of human potential when given dignity and opportunity. As time passed, my children grew into adults who carried forward the same values. Amina established a program teaching young girls financial literacy. My son Hamza created a small fund to support apprenticeships for skilled trades. They no longer asked why we helped others. They asked only where we needed next. And Shazia, dear, resilient Shazia, became the heart of it all. She welcomed newcomers with a warmth that dissolved shame. She knew, better than anyone, the courage it takes to accept help. One evening, I found her in the kitchen of the center, guiding a nervous young mother. "Take a full portion," Shazia encouraged gently. "There is no need to hide here." The words echoed the moment that had changed us both. I stepped back quietly, realizing the lesson had outgrown me. It no longer belonged to one house, one pantry, or one act. It had become a living tradition. On a cool autumn morning, I visited the school again. The once small building had expanded into a lively campus. Murals painted by students covered the walls, bright colors telling stories of hope, unity, and resilience. In one corner, I noticed a painting that stopped me in my tracks. It showed a dining table with people of different ages and backgrounds sharing a meal. At the center was a simple message: "No one eats alone." My throat tightened. I asked a nearby teacher who had painted it. "A group of students," she replied. "They said it represents the future they want to build." The future. Not wealth, not status, but belonging. That evening, as I returned home, I paused at the pantry door. I opened it slowly. Inside were neatly arranged shelves, labeled containers, and baskets prepared for distribution the next morning. No secrecy, no fear, only purpose. I ran my hand along the wooden shelf, remembering the scattered grains of rice from years ago. How fragile that moment had been. How powerful its consequences. Behind me, I heard small footsteps. It was my grandson, Bilal, holding a plate with 2 pieces of bread. "Dada," he said, "I saved one for you. Sharing makes it taste better." I knelt to his height, my heart full beyond words. "Yes," I told him softly. "It always does." He took my hand, and together we walked toward the dining table, where voices and laughter waited. And as the night deepened and stars appeared one by one, I felt certain of something I once could not understand. Kindness does not end. It grows. It travels. It returns in ways more beautiful than we ever imagined. And somewhere in another home, another child would learn to share a meal, not out of fear of hunger, but out of love. Final episode: the table that never emptied. Years later, when my hair had turned the color of winter and my steps had grown slow, I found myself spending more time at the community center than in my own mansion. The mansion had once defined me. Now, the laughter of shared meals defined my life. One evening, the sky glowed amber as the sun prepared to set. Families gathered in the courtyard, laying out long rows of tables. Children carried plates too large for their small hands. Volunteers poured water, their faces shining with quiet purpose. I sat at the head of the table, not as a master, but as a witness to a miracle built from simple acts of care. Shazia, now older but strong in spirit, walked beside me. "Do you remember that day in the pantry?" she asked with a gentle smile. "I remember it every day," I replied. She nodded. That was the day hunger left my children's hearts and pride returned to mine. As the call to prayer echoed softly in the distance, everyone paused in gratitude. Then, together, we began to eat. No one rushed. No one hid. No one felt unworthy. At that table sat teachers, laborers, widows, shopkeepers, and children who would grow up believing that kindness is normal, not rare. My grandson Bilal stood and tapped his glass shyly. "I want to say something," he announced. The courtyard fell silent. "My grandfather says sharing makes food taste better," he continued. "But I think sharing makes people better." A soft murmur of agreement spread across the tables. In that moment, I realized the story no longer belonged to me. It belonged to every hand that served, every heart that forgave, every person who chose compassion over indifference. The pantry door that once had hunger had opened into a world where dignity was served daily. And though my journey would one day end, the table would remain, lengthened by love, strengthened by unity, and never empty. As the stars appeared above us, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, not for wealth, not for success, but for the chance to learn that the smallest act of kindness can echo across generations. Moral lesson: when we see the unseen, feed the hungry, and honor the dignity of others, we do more than change lives. We build a world where compassion becomes a way of living for everyone. Thank you for listening to this heartfelt story. If it touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and remind someone today you are never alone.